All right, this chapter, chapter 4, Raw and Bridge, we're going to look at raw files and how to handle them in Photoshop and some related programs. So, like, you can kind of think about this chapter and next chapter being very much photographer focused. So, we want to open up a new program called Adobe Bridge. So, Adobe Bridge is a metadata, batch process, and organizing and viewing program made by Adobe. So at some point, as you guys progress in either an art career or photography career or other graphic arts professional practice career, you're going to end up with hundreds of thousands of files. And there's just kind of no escaping it. So Bridge is designed to allow you to quickly view, organize, and process these pictures. So like if I wanted to like rename all of these, it's really easy to do that in Bridge. Or if I want to change metadata across all of them, or just I want to sort them, Bridge is is the main program to use that for. For our case, we're going to actually reorganize Bridge a little bit to make it easier for us to do the chapter. So let's take a quick look at this and then reset it up. So up here at the top, we have our toolbars, like we've got our back and forth for navigation through our folders and so on. We've got this little way back guy, which allows us to kind of jump back to a recent folder. We've got our boomerang, which returns us to Photoshop. We've got our import button that allows us to bring in stuff from our cameras. We have send to Photoshop. We have rotate images. Right here is going to be our workspaces similar to what we see in Photoshop. We have a search feature. Then we have our file organization, so like our folder system to like where see everything's at. And then favorites for like ones that we use frequently. Our export filter and collections, which is just kind of a normal panel. So like export's exactly what it sounds like, how to get your files out of here. And then filter and collections is a way to quickly organize and find photos across a bunch of different folders. Preview and publish. So preview allows us to see a larger version of our image. Publish is this neat thing that allows us to send it to like a separate website or server. So like I did a job once where I was working for somebody batch processing photos and I had a publish thing set up to send it to a private server. Metadata is actually pretty cool. Take a closer look at it here in a second, but it's additional information that's stored with the camera. And then keywords is where like we can start adding in additional keywords to our system. So like we can help find photos later. This section right here is going to be our thumbnail panel and just kind of add more kind of context. So let's reorganize our stuff. So I'm going to grab preview and I'm going to click and drag on preview until I see a trapezoid right here. And that will drop it into that spot. I don't need publish anymore. So I'm going to click on the menu and do close panels. And that will be good for us now. Maybe we'll mouse over this little area right here and bring our thumbnails down so we can see our image a little bit more clearly. Next, let's take a look at the rating system. So if we make the first image active, you can hit the numbers on your keyboard. So like 1, 2, 3. There we go. It's command 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 0 all do labeling changes, allowing us to quickly organize and find our files. I'm going to command 0. I can also come over here and right click on it and do no label. I also have some other ones that I can flag it as, like there's also flag and then mark for deletion. So like you can mark it to delete, but it doesn't delete it, so you can go and delete it later. It's just a way of quickly organizing files. Now, since we only have this many right here, it's not actually that big of a deal. So I'm actually going to grab the dog picture and I don't know, let's rate it 3. So let me see, command 3. Then I'll right click on it and I'm going to do label green, which it says approved in here, but like you can use the color labels however you want. And then I could right click off to the side in this panel and do sort by rating. And we can see it takes that 5-star that I had set up for you guys earlier. And this 3-star moves it up and moves all of our colors together. You can also come up to view and go to sort to find your stuff. Now, it's just 8 photos. It's not that big of a deal, but you know, like if you've shot a wedding and you've got 2,000, 2,500 pictures to go through. So like normally I would do is I'd go mark any that I really like 5, go mark any that I like a lot 4, and then ones I'm not so sure about 3. And then I'll go through, and usually what I've got is like a system set up based on the color coding to code it based on just get rid of it because I don't want it like somebody's blinking, but I'm not going to get rid of it until I need to know if I need to do any face swaps. And then I'll mark any that are green, ones that are in the shot list, and then I'll mark any that I like blue or something. So then I'll pull out my shot list, pull up all the green photos, and make sure that I have all of my shot list from that rundown, and I'm not throwing away any photos that I need to modify or edit heavily to get it to match my shot list. Then what I would do is I could click on one of these and I could come over to my keywords and I can create keywords to assign to it. So by assigning keywords to it, I can come back and always find everything that's like a bouquet shot or a kiss shot. So after I've shot like 30, 40 weddings, I can quickly rebuild a portfolio. So like I can build a portfolio of all of those particular kinds of shots, and I can do a single wedding portfolio or maybe 2 different wedding portfolios. Now, whenever I make a change in here, I'm going to get something called an XMP file. So if I go to my desktop and we go to where I've got these files stored, chapter 4, we can see that I now have these XMP files in here from putzing around with these images. So these XMP files are going to be a little confusing. So whenever you make a rating change or something else in Bridge, you're going to get an XMP file, and it's what's called a sidecar file. So for these marks and ratings and stuff to stay with the file, when I move this one right here, noise, I need to move the noise XMP with it. Now notice that that XMP file isn't showing up in Bridge, and that's because Bridge is reading that file and hiding it when it's displaying that file for me. But if I move that XMP file, I will lose anything that's attached to this. Here, let's do the dog one because that one will be an easier XMP to see. See, what are you? Basic. So let's nuke that XMP. And we can see it lost that rating and that color coding. So I would need to re-rate it, and then I would need to recolor code it. There it is. That's Command 8 or Control 8 on your keyboard. Now, when I have one of these active, I can do some further examination of it through what's called IXIF. That's going to be over here in our metadata panel. And metadata is additional information that is stored in our document. So like right here, we can see all of my camera settings. Like when I'm looking at this picture and I'm evaluating what went wrong. So like we look at the dog's face and it's slightly out of focus. Even this right here, which is in focus, is slightly blurry. It's like what happened. We can see that I was at a 50th of a second at f2.8 at 1600. It's like, well, it should be clear. And then we come down here and we see that I'm at 100 millimeters. And it's like, oh, okay. Like there's just a tiny depth of field, and you can't usually successfully handhold 100 millimeters at a 50th of a second for something that's moving. It'll just always be a little blurry. And if this camera, I could have opened up the ISO a little bit more, but I'd start seeing a lot more film grain, kind of like what we see in this one, where there's all that kind of nasty grain in here, even though Photoshop has already automatically removed a lot of the color noise out of that picture. So cool, it shows me all of that information. The other thing that I can embed in here besides the camera data and all the stuff that I'm closing right now is IPTC core stuff. So like I can list myself as the creator, I can list when this one was created, and I can also list my copyright status. So I could be like, this is copyrighted, Regan D. Pufal, and this was taken in 2018, so I would have copyrighted it in 2018, and I can put that status in there so that when somebody else who is a imaging or graphic design professional finds this image, they can quickly and easily find my information because it's sitting right here. So this is a really easy, and it's a really easy way to kind of have like free advertising for when your stuff wanders around the internet for people that know how to look. Now, some websites unfortunately strip this data. It's a little frustrating, but other websites will display it. So like if your stuff is showing up in Google search results and your information, particularly the camera IXIF data, is intact, Google will display any copyright information that's listed there. So it's really handy and really cool to put this information in here, because again, it will help people find your stuff. So like for the chapter, go ahead and let's do the landscape active and come up to IPTC core, and under job title, just put in chapter 4-practice, just so like we can see that you can edit, IPTC data. I'm going to turn off my sorting down here. So I'm going to right click and do sort by file name. So it reorganizes it based on these files, because like these first 4 are the ones we're going to edit. And then these latter 4 are the ones that will be part of the do-it-yourself. Now these are CR2 files, which is a special kind of file called a raw file. So sometimes computer systems can chew through these okay, sometimes they can't. especially on older operating systems, you might not be able to view these outside a special program. That's the other nice thing about Bridge, is that you can view pretty much any regular media file in Bridge, and it'll just kind of chew through it. Some video formats, not so much. Some 3D formats it has trouble with, but image file formats, it's pretty good at chewing through. So after, like, if you're being a professional photographer, you have everything ready to go, and you want to process these raw files into something that you could send to client, because I can't send a CR2 to a client. I will need to send a JPEG, and I want to edit these first. I am going to open them in something that will convert them to an editable raster format in Photoshop using, in our case, something called ACR or Adobe Camera Raw. So make the first image active by clicking on it. Hold down the Shift key and click on this fourth image. So we've got dog, landscape, noise, and upright tool active. Now I've got a bunch of ways of sending this to Photoshop. So I can just like right click and open with Photoshop, or I can click the Send to Photoshop button, or I can come up to Tools, Photoshop. And in this case, I could like photo merge them and other things like that. I don't want to do that. But like I can open these in Photoshop in a bunch of easy ways. In my case, I'm going to right click and do open with regular Photoshop, because I have Photoshop Beta installed right now. So if I click this button, which is another option for you guys, it would open in Photoshop Beta. But for the textbook, let's do 2024. And it put it on my other screen. So give me a hot second. Whoop. So we have now two windows open. We'll have a Photoshop window open that we can't really interact with. And then we're going to have a Camera Raw window, which is our Adobe Camera Raw. And I'm going to go ahead and full screen this and take full advantage of our screen real estate. So Adobe Camera Raw is a standalone it's not standalone. It's an embedded program within Photoshop for modifying raw files into a file format that Photoshop can then edit. Now, what is a raw file? So a raw file is a special file format produced by a camera. And so like when we look at this picture, and we've got like these completely blown out highlights, if this was a JPEG, these highlights are gone. I'm not going to bring them back. But because this is a raw file, I can come over to like my highlight slider or my exposure slider, and I can bring all of this information back. So like if I undo that, we can see that like there's a bunch of areas in here all the way up at 100, and those areas are just gone. They're not coming back. Or like in this image where I've got some areas of true black, or this image where I've got a few areas of true black, I can open those back up and restore information to those areas that otherwise I wouldn't have been able to do with a normal file format. The other thing we can do is we can make pretty drastic color adjustments without causing major degradations to the image. Like if I was trying to do this to a JPEG, it would be a lot less successful. We see a lot of posterization. We see some weird color issues start showing up. Camera Raw will preserve that information for us, so we have some extra stuff around it. So an easy way to think about it is like a JPEG. If you took a photo of a window from inside a dark house and you were using JPEG, you would have to very fastidiously choose between seeing the inside or the outside, because the camera can't see both. Can't see outside, can't see inside at the same time. One will be too dark, one will be too bright. Your eyeballs can do it just fine. In JPEG, it's just all that extra information is gone. In RAW, I can bring some of that highlight or shadow data back. Not all of it, because the camera still can't see all of it compared to our eyeballs, but it can still bring more of it back than what we would have from a JPEG just getting spat out. So this Camera Raw stuff is very, very handy and important for photographers. So let's take a look at how we actually edit in Camera Raw, and it's not too bad. So like across the bottom, we're going to have called our film strip, and whichever one of these is active is our active image. Familiarly, we have our zoom level, we have our ability to change our zoom, we have some different screen modes and sorting. Right here, we have our rating and whether or not we want to delete it. So like whatever we did in Bridge will also come over here. We can do edits and do like before and after, and then I can change the mode of how we're looking at it using these buttons, which doesn't seem like that would be that useful, but I actually use it all the time. It's pretty good. Over here, we have our editing panels. So we have our general basic edits, and then we have various tools that we can also edit with, like crop, remove, masking, red eye, snapshot. Snapshots is a way of saying, let's say I did like a black and white version. I could then make a snapshot of that black and white version and then make a color version and make a color snapshot and basically have multiple ways of the same photo being processed. Then we have a bunch of presets. I don't use these, but like if there's edits you do a lot, you can make presets. And then just a normal file settings. Also up here, we have an export button. So like we have a couple of ways of being done in Adobe Camera Raw. We can click open to open them in Photoshop. We can click open as object to open them as that kind of special smart object we talked about last chapter in Photoshop. We can also click done, which will save all of our edits, but not open anything in Photoshop. Or I can directly convert to like a JPEG from up here rather than having to open it in Photoshop and then convert to a JPEG. Now there's one little button that I've kind of ignored that's astonishingly important for us, which is this guy right here. So go ahead and click here for first, and we're going to change our color space to Adobe RGB and 16 bits. So like we've got big beefy camera files. Spoiler, these are going to be 12 to 14 bits depending on what camera it is. So like I want to be able to use all of those bits. So like if we were down at 8 bits, I discard a bunch of color information. If I'm at 16 bits, I keep a bunch of color information. Notice over here my lab values are changing as I flip between those as I lose color information. And then color space, we'll talk more about this in chapter 11, but this is a good color space for photographers to work in. It plays nice with a lot of nicer monitors, and it plays nice with a lot of papers. And we'll leave the rest of these settings alone. It probably defaulted to this sRGB, which is like a great one for sharing on the web, but we'll stick with Adobe RGB for editing, and we'll click OK. So all we did right there is we told Adobe Camera Raw to take better advantage of that extra color information that's in these special RAW files compared to a normal JPEG that you would see floating around on the internet. Okay, let's go ahead and start editing. So I'm going to make the first image active. I'm going to come up here to the top right, and I'm going to click on Edit. And then I am going to click on my shadow highlights, which was on by default. That's what those blue marks are. And then I'm going to click this one on as well, but we're not going to see anything with that. So these are my highlight and shadow warnings. So this is telling me when I've got an area that's too bright or too dark. So let's say I was in here on light and I cranked this up. Everywhere that's red right now is kind of blown out. We can see that when I click this off. And generally when you're editing, not always, but generally you want to edit so you're just starting to get some areas of true white and where you're just starting to get some areas of true black, because that will give you a full range of tones to work with when you're printing or exporting or doing other things with it. Okay, so let's come over to this light section. So again, I'm in basics. I've clicked both of these on, and I'm going to come down to light. In light, we're going to adjust the exposure up 3/4 of a stop. Exposures in photographic stop, so 0.75. And so basically this just kind of pretends like the area got more light or less light. So like get a longer shutter speed or a slower shutter speed. Contrast, we're going to bump it up a little bit. This either moves things out or in towards the middle in our histogram. So this histogram is a display of all of our tones. So we can see that the image was very dark because all of our tones were over here to the left. Ideally, tones will end up being kind of central in a lot of photographs, but not always. And as you can see, as we move this contrast slider, it moves tones either towards or away from center. In our case, we'll do 5 to move it slightly away from center. Highlights we'll leave alone. Shadows, since this was underexposed, we're going to bump our shadows up by 20 to open it up a little bit. And then we're going to bump our white tones up by 30, and we'll leave our black tones alone. So if we click our before and after, we can see that already this picture is looking a lot better. Next, we're going to collapse down light and go to color. Color is going to allow us to change our color temperature and our tint, and then our vibrance and saturation. A really easy rule of thumb, although we'll break it this chapter, is if you move temperature to the right or left, you move tint the same direction, but not quite as far. So like if you're ever wondering like what and how much to move, if you move temperature, so we're going to move this to 9,100, we're going to bump our tint just slightly over by another 5 to 15. Vibrance is a tool that a lot of people when they're first starting out will take too far, or in either direction. Same thing with saturation. Vibrance creates the illusion of deeper tones without having the pure tones that saturation will cause. So generally, when you're working with this, unless you're going for a big solid pure tone, you want to use vibrance. And vibrance goes a long way. If you're going past like plus 20 in vibrance, you're probably taking it too far. If you're going past 10, or if you're 10 or lower in vibrance, you're probably in the right amount of bump over. And we'll leave saturation alone in this one. So we'll close color, and we're then going to pop open effects. So effects allow us to do things like add or remove film grain. So like, was the camera lens blurry? Was there film grain in it? Clarity is this kind of micro sharpening thing. This is another one that people tend to take a little too far. So this is another one that's like 5 or 10 goes a long way. Don't really take it too much further than that. Dehaze is kind of cool. Like you can pretend to add haze, but it only kind of works that direction. But like if you have a hazy scene, it works astonishingly well at removing haze. We'll leave this one alone for this chapter. And then we also have a vignette, which is a darkening or brightening of the edges. Vignetting can be a really useful way to help draw focus to certain areas. And I'll actually usually do that through masking rather than use the vignette slider. And then we have another grain slider, which is like film grain. Although in this case, like texture does pretty much the same thing. Texture will do a crazy thing to skin wrinkles. It's kind of nice. We'll look at some of these other ones in these coming pictures, but for this one, light, color, and effects has worked out quite well for us. Similar to what we see in Photoshop, there's a little eyeball, so I can click it on and off to see the effect, or I can come down here and do my toggle on and off to see what's been happening so far to my image. All right, now we have another edit to make. So we're going to move out of the Basics tab, and we're going to go to Crop. So when I look at this image, the first thing I noticed, even before that it was underexposed, is that it was crooked. And now that we have this crop overlay up, it's pretty easy to see that like the top of this wall is angled compared to the bottom of the frame, which is parallel to this line running across here. So I want to rotate this so it becomes straight. Now, rather than do this, where we're just going to spin it around by mousing over the edges, there's another tool that does it quite quickly. So you can hold down Command or Control to bring it up. Or over here in the option area, you can click on the bubble level, and this allows you to click and drag a line. So I'm going to click right about here and drag to the right, and I'm going to line this up with the top edge of that wall, and boom, it straightens the image. This bubble level makes it really easy to straighten the image. Now, if you want to adjust a little bit where it's cropping, so I'm going to drag it over a little bit so the puppy is center because it looks better that way. So straighten the image using crop. Otherwise, the crop tool is going to look like what we see in Photoshop with the crop tool. We'll take a look at geometry here in a minute when we get to the fourth picture. When I'm done with crop, I'm just going to click back into Basics. Now, something that's a little neat about Camera Raw is that as we're working in this, if you learn Bridge in Camera Raw, you pretty much have learned another program called Adobe Lightroom, which is a professional editing and organizing program designed only for photographers. So like learning this is like learning 2 more programs, which is cool, or learning another program, Lightroom, which is cool. Next, we're going to do a little bit of color work on the puppy because it's a little washed out and the colors could be a little bit stronger. So I am not going to open up the color panel because we already did that. Instead, we're going to come down to the color mixer. Now, we're not going to use color grading in this chapter. Like if you go into video, this is color grading from video. And there's a whole philosophy and editing style behind this. It's a little bit past what we can do in this textbook. But like if you are familiar with video editing, color grading, here it is. What we want to use is Color Mixer. And in Color Mixer, I'm going to pick HSL, and then I'm going to click All. Now, we could be in just hue, saturation, luminance, but we're going to do all because we're going to use all of them. And what these are hue, literally what color. So if I wanted to make like that blue collar a different color, I'd come down to blues, and I'd be like, make it pink. Saturation is exactly what it sounds like, how pure the color is. If I wanted to make that blue color punchier, I could drag or reduce the saturation. And then luminance is how bright it is, so I could darken or brighten that color as well by targeting it based on a color. This is really cool. It's like sometimes like I won't feel like editing color in Photoshop, and I will open up a regular JPEG in here just to get the color mixer because it's a lot. I like this color mixer a lot. All right, so here's the All button. And we're going to go to Hue. And we are going to go down to blue, and we're going to do a little bit on that color. We're going to make it more blue because it's a little kind of cyan blue in this picture. And we're going to go down, and we're going to go to saturation. And we're going to bump oranges up to 15. I'm going to hit tab to move to the next one. 20 for yellows, and then I'm going to tab down to blues. You can click if you want, by the way. I just like hitting the tab key. And I'm going to do -10 for the blues. Then we're going to go down to luminance, which again is how bright it is. And I want to darken the greens and the aquas. So I'm going to do -50 on green and -50 on aqua. Now, it doesn't really look like all that much has happened until we come back up here and we click that eyeball on and off. And we can see that this is a subtle but important change to the picture. So like we've gotten rid of some of that kind of extra highlights that are on the green foliage, and also kind of made certain areas a little bit more punchy. All right, go ahead and collapse down Color Mixer. Next, we want to brighten the eyes a little bit because they're a little dark. So just like in Photoshop, I can target and edit by making a mask, but masking in Camera Raw is a little different. So over here in the top right, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4 down, and I'm going to pick up this thing that looks like a circle with a series of dots called masking. In masking, I'm going to click on the brush tool. And my mouse is going to appear huge compared to yours, of course, but that's because I have my mouse set up to be big, so it's easy for you guys to follow. So your brush will look a little bit smaller than mine. But you're going to use the same settings. I'm going to do brush size 5, and then I'm going to set the rest of these to 100, and I'm going to turn auto mask off. Auto masking, by the way, is cool. So like if I was using these settings and I was painting over this, see how like it's kind of trying to find the edge of the dog for me? Super neat. Not what we want, though. Anyway, for us, what we're going to do is we're going to set it 5, 100, 100, 100. Feather is how soft it is. Flow is like how quickly it comes out of the brush. And then density is like the color density of the effect. So I'm going to mouse over an eye and I'm going to click. And I'm going to mouse over the other eye and I'm going to click. And you can think of as anywhere that's red is where it's going to affect. And we can even see that as a black and white mask up here in this new masking panel that pops out when we have this little brush icon active. We'll take a Like if I made a new one, create new mask, brush, we can see that I can have multiple in here. So like here's my mask 2, here's my mask 1. And like if I want to make mask 1 active, I can see now that it's labeled by this brush. And if I make mask 2 active, it's labeled by this brush. Anyway, I don't want mask 2, so I'm going to nuke that and go back to my mask 1. In mask 1, we get a pared down but still useful basics tab. And in the Basics tab, let's bump the eyeballs up a little bit in brightness. So where it says exposure, I'm going to do plus 0.4, so 0.4 of a stop. And then we're going to do whites plus 25. And that adds a little bit of emphasis to the eyes. Now, as you're learning how to edit photos, a really easy rule of thumb is to take it too far and then bring it back. So it's like, I think this looks good, this saturation. Take it down like a third off of whatever you did. Or if you brighten or make certain areas punchier, bring it down a little bit because it's pretty easy to take things much, much too far. All right, let's take a look at our next image. So I'm going to click on the landscape and let's do a little bit of cleanup on this. Now, my general workflow for a landscape will not actually be to follow the order of the tools presented, which is a pretty good rule of thumb, actually. It's just like, what order should you do this stuff in, the order it's presented. I prefer to instead actually to hop down to optics and do optics first. So optics allows me to do 2 things. The first one is to remove chromatic aberration. So let's zoom in the image and even see what that is. So hit Z for zoom tool if your magnifying glass isn't active. And there's a little center point pivot over here, and we're going to click and drag to zoom in on that pivot. Now we can see on the side of the pivot and the side of this brush, we've got this kind of magenta and we've got this kind of cyan green right here. This is what we call chromatic aberration. So chromatic aberration is where the edges of the frame, the wavelengths of light are not aligned in the way that they've been focused. Because of how wide angle lenses work, and how light works, those areas can have trouble, the outside images, of first aligning all the wavelengths of light into a single clear area. Now, you're going to see this a lot with cheap lenses, or even really expensive lenses, like the one that's being used here, when it's a wide angle and it's backlit. So backlit, wide-angled shots will generally, especially towards the edges, have chromatic aberration or cheap camera lenses. Now, this used to be a hideous nightmare to fix. I can't even describe like what this was like to fix back like when I was still shooting on like a 30D or whatever. Now, over here under optics, we click remove chromatic aberration and it's gone. Like it's earth-shattering change. Photographers wept for days because now you can just click it and it's gone. Just like in Photoshop, I can hit Command or Control 0 to fit everything back on my screen. Now, that was a problem introduced by the camera lens. Now, there's another problem that can be introduced by the camera lens, which was vignetting and distortion. So if I click Use Profile Corrections, you can see that when I click this on and off, it's almost like there's like a circle inside of here that is getting flattened out, and then the image is becoming more even in tone all the way across as the edges of it are being brightened. So this is a lens-based vignette, and then this is the famous mustache distortion for the 16-35-2 from Canon. And again, like this used to be in digital uncorrectable until we got this button. Like you could try to do it manually and it didn't work out very well. In film days, there's this goofy thing where you could use your lens on the projector and flip it and kind of just fix some of that, but not all the way. Especially the vignette. Vignette you couldn't fix that way. Anyway. This is a single button distortion. Now, like this one is, unlike remove chromatic aberration, where in just about every case you want to remove it. This one you don't always want to remove, but it's also going to change the way you edit the image. Because like we can see pretty drastic changes up here in my tonal range, and we can see pretty drastic appearance changes in the image. So you want to decide right away if you want this on or off. And the answer isn't always on. Next, let's straighten the image. So we're going to do exactly what we did on the puppy, where we drew a line. So I'm going to make the landscape active. I'll come up to C for crop tool, and I can hold down Command or Control or click on the bubble level. And I am going to click, oops, why do I still have the magnifying glass? There we go. And click and drag across for my line. We can see that it straightens the image, and I'm going to drag over to the right again because I want the little rainbow nice and center, and I'll double click to accept the crop, returning me back to the basic slider. Next, let's do some basic corrections for the image. I'm going to come over to light, and in exposure, I'm actually going to bump it up a little bit. So like right now when I'm editing this, I'm not going to pay too much attention to the sky. I'm mostly going to look at the ground because we're going to edit the sky separately here in a second using masks. So for my exposure, I'm going to bump it up by 0.25. You can see that makes the ground look a little bit better. Sky is not looking great. Contrast, we're going to bump that up by 20. Highlights, we're going to be, well, we are going to target the skies a little bit and do minus 100. Whites, we're going to bump up by 10. And then blacks, we're going to do minus 30. And again, you can see how we're just starting to get a little bit of blue in here from my shadow warning, telling me that I'm getting some nice deep tones in there. Next, I'm going to pop open color. And in color, I'm going to set my temperature to 4850. And I'm going to set my tint to 8, making a little bit kind of a cooler, greener image this time. And I'm going to bump vibrance up by 5 again. I'm going to pop open effects. And in effects, I'm going to go to clarity, and let's do 5. And then we do have a little bit of haze in here, some atmospheric perspective. So let's nuke that a little bit and do dehaze 10. It's also going to punch up the sky a little bit. So we click this on and off, you can see how that punches up the sky. Notice how the horizon gets a little bit darker as it pulls out that atmospheric perspective. Yeah, I like that. All right, color mixer. In color mixer, starting with hue, we're going to adjust the greens a little bit. We're going to make them greener instead of the kind of blue they are right now. So we're going to do minus 15, warm them up a little bit. And we're going to go to aquas, and we're going to do a big change, 100. And basically, we're trying to get these kind of cyans here to be more true blue. We're going to go down to saturation. Let's smack up those greens a little bit, and we're going to do 10. And then in luminance, we're going to putz around with these kind of blues again. And I'm going to do minus 50 in aqua and blue. Now, honestly, minus 100 in both of these sliders looks pretty rad. So like if I do minus 100 and I do, oops, I did plus 100 there. If I do minus 100 and minus 100, that sky looks pretty cool now, right? But if I zoom in, we can see that I'm getting this kind of nasty bordering. And that's because I've done too drastic of an edit. And by doing so drastic of an edit, it becomes obvious. Now, I still have a little bit of that nasty bordering even at -50, but it's much less noticeable, so I'm more okay with it. Also notice how that helps pull out that little light shaft rainbow right here a little bit more. Looks pretty good. Now, looking at the ground, that's about where I want the ground, but I want the sky, particularly this area above the cloud shelf, to be darker. So in landscape photography, the sky is a light source and the ground is merely reflecting light, which means that the sky is frequently a good 1 to 2 stops brighter than the ground, so we have to edit it separately. Back in the day, you would put kind of like a piece of darkened glass over the sky and a piece that would transition to clear glass for the ground, and that's how you would correct this thing. It's called a graduated neutral density filter. But with how flexible camera raw files are now, or HDR files, which we'll look at in the next chapter, we mostly do it on the computer now. All right, so I'm going to go all the way down to my masking. Again, that's the circle with the dotted line circle. And in this case, we're going to just start with a sky edit. So Photoshop knows, or Adobe Camera Raw knows, that we often need to darken our sky. So they've made a sky button. And now our sky, marked here in red, is ready to edit. And we're going to do -half a stop. Now that already looks pretty good. So like if I click this on and off, we can see like, yeah, that's a pretty good change. But I think we can push it a little bit further. And I don't want to do it with a sky edit. I want to kind of softly transition this edit. So I'm going to make a fake graduated neutral density filter. So to add another mask to this edit, I'll click Create New Mask. And in this case, I'm going to pick a linear gradient. With linear gradient active, this is going to behave just like the gradient tool in Photoshop. I'm going to click at the very top and I'm going to drag down. Now notice it's going to be hard to get this straight, so Photoshop has made it easy for us to do that. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key. You see how that snaps it into an even 15-degree rotation. So I can now have it perfectly straight to my horizon. And I will drop the bottom edge right here at about the bottom edge of my cloud shelf, and then release. Let's darken this area up a little bit further. So we're going to do -1, and then we're going to do +20 for the contrast. And if we click our masking on and off now, we go from here to here, creating a very dynamic, attractive sky. Now, this does seem like a lot of editing for an image, but for most landscape photography, the edits that we've done for this are actually pretty modest. So like when you're looking at a lot of photography online, the changes that people are making are often pretty drastic these days. So feel comfortable to push things as you need, although don't make it cartoony, but like stuff gets edited pretty heavily these days. Okay, let's look at some more features of Adobe Camera Raw on some of these other pictures. So I'm going to open up this third image of the night sky. Now the night sky image, we're going to start with something called denoising. So kind of like in the last one where it's just like, what are my main problems in this? I want to fix a bigger problem before even optics, or it's like we are going to probably want to putz around with this stuff. But even before we get to that, we want to deal with the noise. So I'm going to pop up in the detail one. So in the detail one, I have sharpening, which unless I'm going to directly output out of this into JPEG, I'll do my sharpening in Photoshop. It's a better place to do it. But we also have denoise, and I want to just click this denoise thing. Now this is going to use AI technology to look at the image and try to figure out where the image noise is and remove it. So in this little enhance window that we're seeing right here, if I click it on and off, we can see that when I have it clicked on, there's this kind of RGB speckling and this kind of white speckling in there called image noise. And it will be especially bad, can I click? Yeah, down here in the shadows. So image noise likes to live in the dark areas, and we can see that this looks like garbage. Now before, we had this kind of severe blurring tool that we could use to get rid of it. Not that we're still not seeing some blurring here using AI. The amount of blurring that we're getting is significantly less. We're also losing far less of the stars than we would have with the older removal tools. So depending on how beefy your computer is, this might take a hot minute. Mine's pretty beefy, so it goes pretty fast. And we'll just go ahead and use these default settings and click Enhance. We have a little progress bar down here telling us how long it has to go, and it will spit out a second image for us to use. So here is the original, and here is the denoised. You can't really see much of a difference until you zoom in. And let's go down to the shadows. And we can see that this, yeah, it's a little smeary, but it's not bad. But when we click into this one and we go down to the shadows, and let's turn off shadow warning so you can see it for one. We can see a bunch of nasty luminance noise and even some kind of like RGB smearing in here from the base noise reduction that it does. Because there is some down here that's already being applied automatically to the image. It always applies 25 color noise reduction to try to get rid of that. So you end up with a bunch of luminance noise in here that's speckling. But the AI pretty significantly reduces it without too much damage to the actual image. Okay, let's run our basic workflow. So first things first is let's go ahead and pop open optics. And I am going to click on remove chromatic aberration. There'll be some in here. I'm not going to zoom in on it. And then I'm going to click on use profile corrections. And you know what? I think I kind of like the vignette, so I'll turn that back off. So we'll leave profile corrections off. Next, just like on the last image, this is slightly crooked. No matter how good I am on my tripod, I always seem to end up slightly crooked. And I'm going to base it on this line right here rather than the mountain. So I'm looking at that line and release. I get a nice straighten. I'm going to drag over to the left again. So I've got my road line hitting my power corner to help with my composition. I'll double click to accept the crop. Next, we're going to do our basic color edits again and light edits. So we'll go to light, and I think this one is a little dark. So we'll do 0.25 up in brightness. We'll bump the contrast up by 20. Highlights, which there's a lot of highlights up in here, especially on the horizon, we'll nuke down by -50. And then we'll bump the actual whites, which is going to be kind of like the stars, up by 15 or so. And already we can see like a pretty dramatic difference in the picture that's kind of really helping pump up those stars. Let's go down to color. And remember how I said, like, if you move this to the right, you move this to the right and left. In this case, we're going to split these. Night skies is a kind of unique instance where it looks better to usually add blue and add magenta rather than move these together. So where we have temperature, we're going to drop it to 3,500. And we're going to bump tint up to 5, giving us this kind of nice, kind of what we think of as sky color sky. We'll go down to effects, and in effects, we're going to bump the clarity up by 5, and we're going to bump the dehaze up by 20, because we actually do have quite a bit of haze here. And this looks pretty good, like right before, after. But I think we can push the sky a little bit further. So let's go up to our masking button, and rather than make a linear gradient or whatever, let's just click the sky button again. And we can see that it did a pretty good job of selecting the sky. It added some of the horizon in there, but I'm fine with that. And I'm going to drop the sky exposure. It's still a light source, by the way, by 1/4 of a stop, -25. And then I'm really going to pump the contrast. Let's do 50. And if we click this mask on and off, we can see the effect that that is having in the sky. And it's like, that looks really rad now. So that's pretty good. All right, finally, let's move on to this image. Now this image, I'm going to leave some of the editing deal. Like, I want you to putz with it once we do some basic edits. What I really want you to do in this one is to look at a new kind of rad tool in crop. So we're going to come up to crop, and we're going to go down to geometry, and we're going to pick up this last tool right here called guides. Now we could try automatic, where we'll try to do it automatically, and then we can do it based on horizontal or vertical or manual, manual down here. But these line drawing ones work a little bit like this, and they're really handy for fixing this kind of stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to first draw a line just like we're drawing for the bubble level. So I'm going to draw, and if you don't have this loop where you can kind of see everything, if you click this on and off, so like no loop, so you can see what you're doing. Excuse me. So I'm going to grab the top edge of the pool, and I'm going to go to the other top. I'm going to go across and stay at that top edge, but nothing happens. And that's because we need to draw at least one more line. So what we're going to do is we're going to add another line, and where this comes down like at a right angle, what it's going to try to do is it's going to try to make this a 90-degree angle after rotating these to match the actual edge of the picture. So I'm going to undo that one, and we want to do it along the outside edge of this column. Now don't do it up here at the head or whatever. Do it on the outside edge. Ooh, looks like there's a little bit of chromabs in there. We'll need to fix that here in a second. And line it up with this column edge. Rather than trying to slide back and forth, by the way, I found that dragging down while trying to move side to side makes it a little bit easier. Let's do this side. So I'll click right here, and I'm going to go down. And as I'm going down, I'm trying to get it lined up and release. And we can see that this stands this up. And just to kind of really drive this home. So like here's before, here's after. Here's my side-by-side. So like this looks like a professional picture. This looks like a snapshot. It's like this is the Pulgus Water Temple in California. And this place is just coated in wedding photographers, which, yeah, if I was a wedding photographer, I'd be all over this place. This place looks rad. But I meant like I had like 2 seconds to grab my snapshot while they were going through. Now there is a way to fix this in camera. So like the tilt, obviously I could tilt it correctly. And then I could also point my camera back and forth, up and down to kind of correct this keystoning where these lines normally would have met somewhere way up here in the distance. Or you can use a fancy tilt shift lens to fix it. It's the Scheibenflog principle. I can never pronounce it. But you can use a tilt shift lens to do what we're doing here in Photoshop in camera. And those lenses, sometimes it's worth to do it in the lens. They're pretty expensive. All right, so now that we've fixed our tilted crop, let's come over to our Basics tab and let's check out our, not lens blur, our optics, and click on Remove Chromatic Aberration and use Profile Corrections. And I think I want both of these on. I'm going to zoom out a step. Badoop. You know what? Actually, no. Let's turn off lens corrections. Leave chromab removal on, because like that'll fix. You can see how it's grabbing some of that stuff off the pillars. But let's leave profile. Let's leave profile off, and then let's do some basic edits. I'm going to come over to light, and I'm going to come over to exposure. Let's do 0.35 for exposure. Highlights are a little bright. So let's do -25. And shadows are a little crunchy in those trees, so let's bump those up by 35. You can see I've got a little bit of a, oh crud, what's it called, lens flare right here. This is like a cheap camera lens, by the way. It's about as cheap as it gets for an EF lens. Let's hop down to color, and let's bump the color up to 6750. And let's bump the tint, to 25. And then clarity and dehaze, let's bump both of those up to 5, because, a little bit always goes pretty far there. And we've got a decent looking image here. Next, what we need to do is we need to go through and clean up the color a little bit further. So in Photoshop, we'll go down to Color Mixer. In Color Mixer, let's address this pool color, because I don't really like that kind of aqua, so we're going to make it more blue. So we'll do aqua 70 and blue 15. You see how that kind of moved this closer to what we kind of think of as true blue. In saturation, let's bump both of those up by 10. So aqua and blue can both go up, not 110, by 10. And then luminance, honestly, the sky in here would look better a little darker. So let's go over to luminance and do -10 and -10. Finally, let's clean up the pool. So like if we zoom in, we can see that there's like a leaf here. I'm gonna hold down the space bar to get the hand tool. And we can move through here. There's a leaf. Here's like a little vent cover or whatever. And here's like another leaf. Now to remove stuff from a picture in Camera Raw, we've got a couple of options. Come over here to the top right and pick the third tool down, the Erase tool. And in the Erase tool, we have, we have Erase tool, we have the Heal tool, and we have the Clone Stamp tool. So Clone Stamp is really good for cloning. So let's say I wanted to remove this. I can paint over it and like it disappeared for a second. Let's turn on Show Overlay and we can see where it's sourcing from. So I am copying here to here, and I can actually move where I'm copying around and kind of use this to duplicate stuff if I want. But it's a way of removing stuff, and like it's the old way. So like we have two new better tools. So I have the Healing Brush tool, which is conceptually kind of the same. So if I brush over it, it's going to do the same thing. But it's doing one more step. So the Clone tool is directly copying. The Healing Brush tool, what it's doing is I'm saying, please remove this. And it's going to pick an area and be like, this is probably what you want to copy over. And then it's going to look at the area surrounding this. and use that surrounding area to try to help blend it together. And honestly, it's pretty good. Then we have the erase tool, which works by just painting over what you want to remove, and it will use the surrounding area to try to erase it. I'm going to turn off show overlay, and we can see that that did an okay job. Like it messed up a little bit right there. Now, if I do have a line area that gets thoroughly messed up, that's where I would use this. Like let's say I wanted to remove this leaf and I was removing this much area for some reason. We can see that it starts off not doing a great job. And what I would do is I would adjust the placement of this to line up the lines. Otherwise, I would just always kind of default to the erase tool to go through and clean up stuff from the image. You can see that it, okay, I do have to actually use this one. Great. Woo. Yeah, okay, that time it chose from a better spot. So that's another thing you want to, oh, I didn't know it would do that. You can click on it and it switches tools. That's outrageously cool. Sorry, it's just like when you find, like every so often, Photoshop surprises you with something new and cool. It's just like it's live updating between those tools. That is nice Photoshop. Nicely done, Adobe. I don't usually have nice things to say about Adobe, but nicely done there, guys. And all right, yeah, I don't want to copy from that. We'll just do erase. So go through and kind of clean up some of these areas. Like this can also go away. And basically, you want to use this to remove any distractions. So it's like what does not actually look good in the image. Like you don't have to go overboard, but remove stuff. Like if you want to be masochistic up here, you could pull out these power lines. That's way too much work. You could also be a little naughty and start going through and removing stuff from trees. This is where it kind of like gets into like ethics about like what is ethical and not ethical to do in photography. Removal is the one where a lot of people kind of start getting a little iffy about it, or like adding stuff. People also get pretty iffy about it. Okay, so we need to get this back out of Photoshop. So like, how do we get this out of the program? So we could click open. Again, this would bring it into Photoshop. We're not going to do that. I could be done here and just click done. That's what we're going to do in a second. Or I could also come up here and click the drop down and produce my JPEGs here. For us, I want to look at how we can produce JPEGs from Camera Raw. So we're just going to click done. Now, when I click done, all of my edits are going to be saved as a special file format called an ACR file, which will be in a folder with the rest of these. Let's go ahead and open up that folder. Boop, badoop, badoop. I'm in, that was the right spot. And we can see now that I've got exit. Here's my ACR files for all of my files, except for one. So when I made that denoise image, so like the landscape, when I clicked denoise, it made a new special kind of file in here called a DNG, a digital negative, which is an open sourced raw file. And these guys are cool because they package that ACR file inside of itself. CR2 files can't do that. So there won't be an ACR file for the DNG, even though we made edits for it. But there will be for all of our CR2s. CR2 is a Canon Camera Raw file format, Canon Camera Raw. Now, Photoshop tells me that these are cropped because it shows me the crop tool, and it also shows me that these are edited because it shows me that little basics tab telling me which ones of these have been modified. Now, I want to get 4 of these out of here. So I'm going to command click on the noise image to remove the one that I didn't actually edit, and then command or control click on the one I did edit. So I have these 4 active. Then to get these out of Bridge, well, not really out of Bridge, because Bridge is showing me where they're at. To create my JPEGs within Bridge, I'm going to come up to File, and I'm going to go to Export To, and I'm going to pick Custom Export. From Custom Export, I've got a couple of settings to make. So for my saving options, I am going to do original location. That's fine. I could move it into a new folder, but original location will work for what we need to do right here. I could also have it make a new subfolder and type in a new name for it right there. Manage conflicts, I usually do create unique file names. So if I accidentally try to nuke something, I'll have 2 versions of it. Or if I am kind of like re-exporting an entire thing because the setting was wrong, then I'll do overwrite. File format for us today, we want this to be shareable. So we are going to do JPEG, and then we're going to leave the extension as JPEG, and we're going to turn the quality up to 12 because we're going to make it a little bit smaller. So like quality isn't going to matter. This quality slider affects like how good it looks, but it also affects how much it's being compressed as a lossy format. So 12 means it's avoiding most of the compression, so it will maintain its appearance a lot. It'll retain its appearance better than one of these ones down, one of these lower level settings, but it'll be a larger file size. Scale, I'm going to pick resize 2. Fit to long edge is my usual recommendation, but you could do fill or you could pick a different thing, but fit long edge is really easy. Dimensions, what's my longest edge going to be? My recommendation for the web is 900 to 1200 because it is large enough for people to enjoy, but small enough that it's hard to steal and print off. Resolution, I'm going to go ahead and set that to 72, and I'll leave don't enlarge on. It's not going to matter for us right now, but I'm going to leave that turned on. Metadata, I usually do remove location information. Now, there isn't going to be any location information in these, but if you were processing photos that had a GPS unit for the camera that took them, so for example, your phone, it embeds a GPS tag about where the picture was taken. So if you don't want people to know where you took the picture, so like if you take a picture in your front yard, they can find your address, turn on remove location information. You could also do like copyright and contact only. That's another pretty common one that people will choose. Otherwise, this is looking pretty good, and I'll click Start Export. We'll get a little progress bar. It'll show me where it's going, and I'll get my folders down here. And when it's done, I'll just click Close. Now, to keep this all nice and organized, I want to put all of my edited pictures into their own folder. So I'm going to shrink this down a little bit so it's easier to see what I've got in here. And I want to make a new folder down here. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to pick New Folder. And that gives me a new place to put this. And I'll label it Chapter 4-Done. Now, here's the thing that makes Bridge, again, very useful. If we actually go look at this folder, we can see that there are 9 gazillion files in here compared to what we actually see down here. And that's because as we're editing, our XMP files got made by anything we did in Bridge, and our ACR files got made by ACR, except of course for our DNG. So we want to move all of these together, because if I move my DNG file or my ACR file or my CR2 file all separate from each other, they no longer talk. They don't know where the other one is. They can't be displayed properly. And I've effectively just deleted all of my edits. Now, since Bridge doesn't display that stuff, but kind of it just displays the edits for you. If I just grab everything here and drop it into the folder, it will move all of these extra files for me. So I'm just going to click on this first image, and I'm going to shift click on this last image. I don't want my non-edited denoise one, so I'm going to Command or Control click on this one to deselect it. So now I have all of these selected. So basically pairs. You should be able to look through this and see pairs. And I will drag it over to this folder. They're now all contained within. So I now have all of my edits ready to go. So I have my fancy raw files for if I want to do more work, and I have my shareable JPEGs sized for showing on the web. I click this back button, move back up a level. Now, to send this many files to somebody, I would right click on this folder and I would pick Compress. They actually added making zip files in Bridge like a year ago. It was really funny because I wrote this chapter and then like the next day they added Compress. So it was fun to talk about in the classroom. Anyway, so I now have my zip file and they're all ready to go. So rather than sending somebody way more than this, because again, if I go back to Finder, we can see that this folder has a ton of files in it, 13. So rather than having to upload or send these to somebody one at a time, I can now just send them this zip file, and it's that easy. It's also, in theory, a little bit smaller. Let's see, get info. 171 megabytes, and you are 169, so slightly smaller from the JPEGs, and they're getting compressed. Yeah, RAW is a lossless format, excuse me. Well, so hopefully this chapter was fun. Next chapter, we'll take a look at some more fancy camera stuff. All right, for this DYO, you should edit the 4 remaining images in the folder. So they're kind of similar to what we just edited. We've got some landscapes, we've got like this weird portrait, and so on. And when editing your pictures, you should make basic color adjustments, basic visual adjustments like light and dark, some optics, masking, healing, and so on is needed for each image. After you're done, you should convert the raw file to a JPEG with the same settings from the book, and then create a folder that's been zipped together with the raw files, the XMP, ACR, and JPEG files as well. Now, editing pictures like this is a little difficult. Like, we haven't talked a lot about qualitative editing. So part of the point of this is to let you to explore and play around with what you think looks good in an edit. So have a little bit of fun with it.